It's Brittany Corrigan. Welcome to Some of Each, Episode 10, Volcano. Some of Each, in which I read you some fiction, this week some memoir, some poetry, and some children's lit on a theme every week. And so here for Some of Each, Episode 10, we have Volcano in honor of the 40th anniversary of the eruption of Mount St. Helens. So keeping us company tonight, we have this lovely jar of ash from the Mount St. Helens eruption 40 years ago. This was given to Thomas's grandmother after the eruption. So all the way out in Michigan, and somehow it made it all the way back here to Portland, right near where it came from to begin with. So ash from Mount St. Helens for the eruption. So some of each volcano. So I'm going to start out by reading to you just a little bit of the folklore behind the various names of Mount St. Helens that range, and some of the sort of creation myths around that from the local tribes in the area. So this particular legend that I'm going to read to you about Mount St. Helens is from the Puyallup tribe. So here we go. According to the lore of these tribes, long ago, a huge landslide of rocks roared into the Columbia River near Cascade Locks and eventually formed a natural stone bridge that spanned the river. The bridge came to be called Tamanawas Bridge, or Bridge of the Gods. In the center of the arch burned the only fire in the world, so of course the site was sacred to Native Americans. They came from north, south, west, and east to get embers for their own fires from the sacred fire. A wrinkled old woman, Luit-Latkla, Lady of Fire, lived in the center of the arch, tending the fire. Luit, as she was called, was so faithful in her task and so kind to the Indians who came for fire that she was noticed by the great chief Taiyi Sahala. He had a gift he had given to very few others, among them his sons Klickitat and Y-East. And he decided to offer this gift to Luit as well. The gift he bestowed on Luit was eternal life, but Luit wept because she did not want to live forever as an old woman. Sahala could not take back the gift, but he told Luit he could grant her one wish. Her wish to be young and beautiful was granted, and the fame of her wondrous beauty spread far and wide. One day, Y-East came from the land of the Multnomas in the south to see Luit. Just as he arrived at Tamanawas Bridge, his brother Klickitat came thundering down from the north. Both brothers fell in love with Luit, but she could not choose between them. Klickitat and Y-East had a tremendous fight. They burned villages, whole forests disappeared in flame. Sahala watched all of this fury and became very angry. He frowned. He smote Tamanawas Bridge, and it fell in the river where it still boils in angry protest. He smote the three lovers, too, but even as he punished them, he loved them. So where each lover fell, he raised up a mighty mountain. Because Luit was beautiful, her mountain, St. Helens, was a symmetrical cone, dazzling white. Y-East's mountain, Mount Hood, still lifts its head in pride. Klickitat, for all his rough ways, had a tender heart. As Mount Adams, he bends his head in sorrow, weeping to see the beautiful maiden Luit wrapped in snow. So that's the Puyallup legend behind the names of Mount St. Helens, Mount Hood, and Mount Adams. Again, for those of you who missed the very beginning, I'm sitting here with a jar of ash from the Mount St. Helens eruption from 40 years ago. So onward with more volcano. All right, so I'm going to read you a little bit of this memoir from Garrett Hongo called Volcano. It's about Hawaii, and there's chapters interspersed within it where they're called the Volcanology chapters, where he talks about the volcanology of the volcanoes in Hawaii. So here we go with Pahoa. The first raw lava I saw close at hand was down alongside Highway 130 at the seacoast south of Kalapana in 1987. In April, I'd heard news reports that the flow had overrun the highway and that lava had burned down a few homes and was pouring into the sea. Curious to see it, I drove down from Volcano. I went through the villages of Kea'au and Kapoho by passing Kaimu Black Sand Beach near Kalapana, stopping at the road barriers on the low hillocks of old lava flows. I was near an area along the seacoast called Kapa'ahu. The air was warm and humid, full of an ocean wind, but I could feel a singe and an acid in it, a weight in its vapor. I stripped off my jacket and sweatshirt, the added layers of clothing I wore up in Volcano all the time, and parked the car along a line of other tourist rental cars pulled off by the shoulder of the road. They were parked beside the cutaway of a lava hill. I could see the layers and layers that had built up over time, a period which could have been centuries or merely a few years for all I knew then. I got out of my car and strolled down the center of the highway, still almost new, its asphalt the matte black of being freshly laid. I could see a spot of palm trees off in the distance, some smoke clouds below them, and a large white ribbon of steam trailing from a point that must have been the coast about 2 miles away. There was no glow of red, but I guessed the steam plume marked the point where lava was entering the sea. I had to walk about a 1/4 mile downhill, cutting through the black expanse of a flow that was almost entirely new lavas, a wide sheet over a swath in the land like a roof freshly drizzled with tar. It eddied in little fans and swirling shapes, mounding in doughy black hills beside the road. Close up, its sheen was silver and metallic, shining like the lead on a sharpened pencil, flaking like packed shards of ice, giving off a low heat and some sulfuric-smelling kind of gas. The highway surface was hot from the tropical sun, and there was something extra in the air, a sizzle of molecules stirring and restirring the atmosphere, heightening the senses, giving off a fume like ozone channeled down from the upper air. Hummocks of new black rock rose up alongside the road, and I could see how it eddied in the flats, pouring like mud through gaps and shallows on the plain around me, fanning out and crusting, rippling into a hardened skin. This was called pahoho, lava of the relatively fluid kind that congeals with a smooth and billowy surface. It cooled from its outside inward, at first forming a thin sheet-like layer of crust on the large flat flows. It ran into an obstacle, the forward part of it blocked by a feature on the earth, as if it was slowed by a momentary slackening in the flow's volume or momentum. The crust might start to twist and curdle like a bedsheet lifted by one of its corners. Pahoa would twist in ripples, gyring around the center of resistance, sending purling rays out from where it was being pulled and tugged, bending over itself, forming a literal radiance that would be preserved. When it mounded, it made a wonderland of silvers and blacks, a topiary of fantasy shapes covering the land and everything on it. I saw Pahoa that looked like the thick, fattened bodies of walruses and sea lions. In other spots, the moving lava had buckled and rolled and solidified like the weave of a basket made from silvered fronds of palm. When it sluiced through a channel, it made frozen spillways and little pans that seemed like a deck of black cards fanned out and placed on a black slate table. Little toes of rock, shining like quicksilver and swelling from the inside out, dropped into the ditches alongside the road, cooling and hardening into strings of silver sausages that singed the asphalt, boiling under them. A smell like a sauce of faint smog, I thought of the air around LA airport at dawn, pervaded the atmosphere, and I rubbed at my eyes. I'd been reading a textbook called Geology of the State of Hawaii, written by Harold T. Stearns. He wrote that its eruptive temperature, in a fire fountain or fissure eruption, sending red gouts of it in a long curtain of fire sheeting upward, it's over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The flow temperature, when it slides like a fluid red cream over the land, is no less hot. Pahoa is emitted containing a lot of volcanic gases, which dissipate as the lava cools. If the lava cools and loses enough gas so that crystallization starts, Pahoa changes into a'e, the lava that is rough and clinkery. I had yet to encounter a live a'e flow. Pahoa presents itself in a myriad of shapes and spreads from an eruptive vent through a system of conduits that can range in size from a few inches to more than 25 feet in diameter. Nahuku, the Thurston lava tube, is that huge. There were layers of flowing Pahoa upslope of me then, made up of several smallish flows, units spreading and forming glass skins a fraction of an inch thick, hardening over, then swelling up in squeeze-ups, fractures in the hardened skin, oozing fresh lava, or cooling down in blocks and slabs of tumuli and pressure domes where the land was flat and the lava had spread itself out in widening and thickening sheets. Up close, its surface could look like asphalt in one spot, then a shining elephant hide or shark skin in another, crusting into shapes like entrails, or a swirl of ropes and cords, tessellating in blistered and filamented surfaces, pumicious, festooned, puffed up in small, intricate, and shelly chambers. When Pahoa pours over a cliff, it forms a lava cascade, a Niagara of molten red rock, a lava fall. When it flows into the sea, it makes a lava delta that can be as big as a football field, a new piece of land that might suddenly crack away from its brittle tie and slide itself into the sea like a sounding whale. Or, if it maintains flowing in the shape of a tube all the way from vent to ocean waves, it can spew forth as a glowing fire hose of lava, Pahoa steaming in a sluice of lantern orange sperm churning into rock and black sand in the liquid staggers of froth and spume from the sea. After walking down the road a while, I came upon a place where a house had been. It looked like a junkyard, or a lot of auto wreckers, shells of scorched cars here and there in the black puddles of the flow, the blackened frame of a bench seat off by itself, round and rusted wheels, half submerged in hardened lava. The flow had swung around a little hill and come down a gully, maybe there was a creek or small gulch here, and sliced through someone's property, someone who liked cars and trucks, someone who had to leave about half a dozen of them behind. There was the husk of a flatbed pickup immersed up to its wheel wells in lava. The steel on it looked like it had sat in rain for 20 years, all paint, upholstery, rubber belts and hoses and tires incinerated away. The hood was caved in and buckled. Its bed was buried under solidified lava. I thought of Ice Age mammoths mired in pools of tar. Ripped sheets of corrugated steel were strewn around, too, sticking up out of the black puddings that held them at funny angles, like stiffened sailboards, like metal sculpture left unbronzed. All was black and rust-colored. Pieces of flat metal like posters or signs lay about, burned of their messages, black and rusting, pocked and curled from the heat. There was nothing like a house anymore, just a few steel pilings sticking up here and there, like the ribs of an old pier exposed at low tide. Indeed, the remnant world around the burning seemed like an eddied land of tidal flats after the ocean had pulled away, draining, full of things half alive, exposed, and shriven of their flesh. I came to a black hump, like the carcass of a gigantic slug, lying across the road. This was where the flow finally cut off and rebuilt part of the highway. I'd heard that it had been rerouted each time that lava cut it off, keeping the way open for residents to come in and out. I'd heard there were people still living on the hillsides. They watched television while lava channeled through the slopes around them. Along the flatland that had been overrun with lava, other families who had evacuated were still coming back to pack up what was left of their things. I met a Hawaiian man who trekked miles across the flow front just so he could get to what was left of his property. A crop of ripening mangoes hanging from trees, still standing in a small pocket of green, cut off from the road but left unscathed, an emerald island among the stark blacks of grays of the flow. I stopped at a point where the flow had mounded up higher than the roof of a semi. It seemed the lava had crested here, burying the highway, inflating from inside until it grew higher than a man standing on another man's shoulders. I hopped up onto the edge of the flow, stepping on lava for the first time, worrying, gauging angles and footholds, measuring myself against its folds, crevices, and gaps. It was still hot, giving off shimmers of heat, and I could feel the skin of my face prickle, the heels of my feet getting warm. I wasn't wearing shoes, just a thick pair of beach sandals. I wanted to feel the lava, would have gone barefoot over it if I could have. It held me up, bearing my weight like a mound of green Japanese floats held together with a seining net, crackling under the spongy rubber of the sandals. It flaked and made a grinding sound as I walked over it, building its heat up under my soft arches, keeping me on the move, taking me farther and farther away from the road. I was spellbound out there, suddenly in a world strangified by this rare phenomenon, a kind of silvery ocean on whose waters I could walk. I felt wrapped inside of a brittle shroud of birthing. The heat did not matter, nor did the faint charge of acidic air annoying my breathing. The sting in my eyes seemed part of the awareness, the joy of feeling something was new. I stalked from mound to mound, making little leaps across gaps and gullies in the flow, playing like a child among fresh dunes of sand when the tide was far, far out. I came to a place where the skin of the flow was ripped. A red dermal gumminess glowed from within it. When I got close, I felt a radiant heat, as from an opened kiln. Lava was alive under the surface of the flow. There was a thick red taffy of it still churned up inside the steel-colored skin. What made things so hot out there, rock to rock, gray pillow to lead-colored mound, was the inner paste, still red and movable underneath, like a lagoon engorged with a tide of luminous plankton, briefly masked and then revealed by the sheet of hardened kelp that floated on its surface. I'd walked on the living rock. I was separated from its temperatures only by the thickness of what had cooled, perhaps inches, perhaps feet, a mere skim of time for the cooling to take place, a dimension's distance between the states of solid and of liquid. The radiance swam past my face and arms, curling as the wind curled around me. I saw more streaks and scarrings of red where the lava was inflating from underneath the hardened patties of rock, cracking open a piece of its surface, stretching from the inside out, pouring through and dripping down, glowing from within. There were soft sizzles of rose in the rock surrounding me. I'd walked past the cooler point of the flow and stood alongside an expanding pond of its red dough, pushing upward through the gray coating of its surface. Heat salved up the skin on my ankles and gripped my calves. My breath shortened. A shimmer of sweat came to my brow. A cold spray of panic broke through the skin on the back of my neck. I turned and moved back the way I'd come, taking shorter steps, making fewer leaps, watching carefully the color under the surface of the silver rock I walked upon. In minutes, I got back to the roadside. I'd only gone a few 100 yards, but within myself, I felt an upwelling like an orange glimmer of pride. A globulous cooling mass loomed beside me. I went and put my hands on the lava again. It flaked and came off in my palms in gross scabs the color of silver and black. Small fires touched off in the dry brush alongside the road. Around its bend, swizzles of burning grass sent up tiny flames and swirls of slate-gray smoke. The white plume of steam I'd seen ribboning out from the coastline was still a mile away across the shining gray sea of Pahoa. So that's a little bit from one of the Volcanology chapters from Garrett Hongo's memoir, Volcano, about Hawaii. All right, so a few poems for you. So I'm going to start with a poem from this book, Different Ways to Pray, by Naomi Shihab, one of my favorite poets. And this is one of my favorite of her poems. This is called Negotiations with a Volcano. We will call you agua, like the rivers and cool jugs. We will persuade the clouds to nestle around your neck so you may sleep late. We would be happy if you slept forever. We will tend the slopes we plant, singing the songs our grandfathers taught us before we inherited their fear. We will try not to argue among ourselves. When the widow demands extra flour, we will provide it, remembering the smell of incense on the day of our Lord. Please think of us as we are, tiny, with skins that burn easily. Please notice how we have watered the shrubs around our houses and transplanted the peppers into neat tin cans. Forgive any anger we feel toward the earth when the rains do not come, or they come too much and swallow our corn. It is not easy to be this small and live in your shadow. Often while we are eating our evening meal, you cross our rooms like a thief, touching first the radio and then the loom. Later, our dreams begin catching fire around the edges. They burn like paper. We wake with our hands full of ash. How can we live like this? We need to wake and find our shelves intact, our children slumbering in their quilts. We need dreams the shape of lakes, with mornings in them thick as fish. Shade us while we cast and hook, but nothing else. Nothing else. That's Negotiations with a Volcano by Naomi Shihab. All right, so I'm going to read you a poem from this book, Flowers from the Volcano by Claribel Alegría. And I wish I spoke better Spanish. I'm still learning. Not enough to read you this poem in Spanish. So this is the translation, Flowers from the Volcano, to Roberto and Ana Maria. 14 volcanoes rise in my remembered country, in my mythical country. 14 volcanoes of foliage and stone, where strange clouds hold back the screech of a homeless bird. Who said that my country was green? It is more red, more gray, more violent. Izalco roars, taking more lives. Eternal Chacmol collects blood, the gray orphans, the volcano spitting bright lava, and the dread guerrillero, and the 1,000 betrayed faces, the children who are watching so they can tell of it. Not one kingdom was left us. One by one, they fell through all the Americas. Steel rang in palaces, in the streets, in the forests, and the centaurs sacked the temple. Gold disappeared and continues to disappear on Yankees' ships, the golden coffee mixed with blood. The priest flees, screaming in the middle of the night. He calls his followers, and they open the guerrillero's chest so as to offer the Chac his smoking heart. No one believes in El Zalco that Tlac is dead, despite television, refrigerators, Toyotas. The cycle is closing. Strange the volcano's silence since it last drew breath. Central America trembled. Managua collapsed. In Guatemala, the earth sank. Hurricane Fifi flattened Honduras. They say the Yankees turned it away, that it was moving toward Florida, and they forced it back. The golden coffee is unloaded in New York, where they roast it, grind it, can it, and give it a price. 7 de junio, noche fatal, bailando el tango la capital. From the shadowed terraces, San Salvador's volcano rises. 2-story mansions protected by walls 4 meters high march up its flanks, each with railings and gardens, roses from England and dwarf araucarias, Uruguayan pines. Farther up in the crater, within the crater's walls, live peasant families who cultivate flowers their children can sell. The cycle is closing. Cascatlacan flowers thrive in volcanic ash. They grow strong, tall, brilliant. The volcano's children flow down like lava with their bouquets of flowers. Like roots, they meander like rivers. The cycle is closing. The owners of 2-story houses, protected from thieves by walls, peer from their balconies, and they see the red waves descending, and they drown their fears in whiskey. They are only children in rags, with flowers from the volcano, with jacintos and pascuas and mulatas, but the wave is swelling. Today's Chacmol still wants blood. The cycle is closing. Tlac is not dead. So that's Flowers from the Volcano by Claribel Alegría. All right. Couple more poems here, and then we'll move on to the grand finale. So these 2 poems are by Derek Sheffield, and I found them on a site that was gathering writing about the 30th anniversary of the eruption of Mount St. Helens, and of course now we're at the 40th. Here again, remember I've got the ash keeping us company tonight. So this was on the 30th anniversary, these 2 poems. The one we're spiraling into. When Mount St. Helens blew that May day in the last millennium, my father steered us through ash falling like snow, wipers ticking past another empty car. Where did they go? And here I am, driving a mute blast of sunlight with friends, asphalt, and what's left of the woods, something like flagpoles bristling on something like ground zero, even as we begin to see a gritty soil. Where smoke once curled from chimneys, a glistening rain of spiders led to lark and elk, swallow and salamander. No more cabins or dinner bells, but so much lupine you'd swear volcanoes exult in violet. Even this pumice crunching under every step won't sink. So much life, we say, hiking back to the car. Cheryl hopes for a Dairy Queen, and Simmons clicks through 1,000 photos as we coast the curves toward sea level, tired bodies swaying together in time. Across the lake to our left, 1,000 trunks still float like sticks in a game. Then the future comes up, the one we're spiraling into, and JP says, sure as shit wouldn't bring kids into this world, in a way that chills my groin. And Elizabeth observes, a stone in her lap the size of a skull. This is young enough to be my child. And this one, also by Derek Sheffield, is Nest Site, Mount St. Helens, Willow Flycatcher. Below her steaming dome, a nest of dead stems cups 2 hatchlings, blind wobblers among bits of shell. Even the way their willow sways above trickles of snowmelt cannot make them less unlikely. Scruffy lumplings slated to unlock their flight and stitch this air of ours, this gray land scorched into being. If there is an aim to their snaps and sallies, their kind of fletched breath, look for it in skin-shut eyes flushed with life, in the way a child keeps from sleep as long as she can, cupping a flashlight for the bloody glow of her hand. So those are 2 poems by Derek Sheffield for Mount St. Helens' 30th anniversary. Okay, so the last poem I'm going to read you is a real short one from my navigation collection, and it's called Inside. Where I work, packages arrive from India at least once a week. Simple as nutshells, the yellow padded envelopes are lined inside with sheer cloth, patterned, embroidered, stitched, remnant textiles or dresses, saris, cut to size and sealed in the hems of parcels. We tear open, peel the cloth away. How could we throw out such gifts, such frayed remains? After visiting Mount St. Helens, someone tells me a story. How when the mountain lost its face, the sound was heard miles away, but those at the volcano's base, in its shadow and eye, heard nothing at all, a quiet lifting. How the centers of things surprise us. How, when we give things away, we wrap them to make them more whole. So that's Inside from navigation. All right, so last but not least, there was no way I was getting through an episode about volcanoes without reading you the Mount Doom scene from The Return of the King. I think this needs no introduction. So, picture Frodo and Sam and Gollum on Mount Doom. The path climbed on. Soon it bent again, and with the last eastward course, passed in a cutting along the face of the cone and came to the dark door in the mountain's side, the door of Sameth Naur. Far away now, rising toward the south, the sun, piercing the smokes and haze, burned ominous, a dull, blurred disk of red. But all Mordor lay about the mountain like a dead land, silent, shadow-folded, waiting for some dreadful stroke. Sam came to the gaping mouth and peered in. It was dark and hot, and a deep rumbling shook the air. "Frodo! Master!" he called. There was no answer. For a moment he stood, his heart beating with wild fears, and then he plunged in. A shadow followed him. At first he could see nothing. In his great need he drew out once more the vial of Galadriel, but it was pale and cold in his trembling hand and threw no light into that stifling dark. He was come to the heart of the realm of Sauron and the forges of his ancient might, greatest in Middle-earth. All other powers were here subdued. Fearfully, he took a few uncertain steps in the dark, and then all at once there came a flash of red that leaped upward and smote the high black roof. Then Sam saw that he was in a long cave or tunnel that bored into the mountain's smoking cone. But only a short way ahead, its floor and the walls on either side were cloven by a great fissure, out of which the red glare came, now leaping up, now dying down into darkness, and all the while far below there was a rumor and a trouble as of great engines throbbing and laboring. The light sprang up again, and there on the brink of the chasm at the very crack of doom stood Frodo, black against the glare, tense, erect, but still as if he had been turned to stone. "Master!" cried Sam. Then Frodo stirred, and spoke with a clear voice, indeed with a voice clearer and more powerful than Sam had ever heard him use, and it rose above the throb and turmoil of Mount Doom ringing in the roof and walls. "I have come," he said, "but I do not choose now to do what I came to do. I will not do this deed. The ring is mine." And suddenly, as he set it on his finger, he vanished from Sam's sight. Sam gasped, but he had no chance to cry out, for at that moment many things happened. Something struck Sam violently in the back, his legs were knocked from under him, and he was flung aside, striking his head against the stony floor as a dark shape sprang over him. He lay still, and for a moment all went black. And far away, as Frodo put on the ring and claimed it for his own, even in Sammath Naur, the very heart of his realm, the power in Barad-dûr was shaken, and the tower trembled from its foundations to its proud and bitter crown. The Dark Lord was suddenly aware of him, and his eye, piercing all shadows, looked across the plain to the door that he had made, and the magnitude of his own folly was revealed to him in a blinding flash, and all the devices of his enemies were at last laid bare. Then his wrath blazed in consuming flame, for his fear rose like a vast black smoke to choke him, for he knew his deadly peril and the thread upon which his doom now hung. From all his policies and webs of fear and treachery, from all his stratagems and wars, his mind shook free. And throughout his realm a tremor ran, his slaves quailed, and his armies halted, and his captains, suddenly steerless, bereft of will, wavered and despaired. For they were forgotten. The whole mind and purpose of the power that wielded them was now bent with overwhelming force upon the mountain. At his summons, wheeling with a rending cry, and at last desperate race, there flew, faster than the winds, the Nazgul, the ring-wraiths, and with a storm of wings they hurtled southwards to Mount Doom. Sam got up. He was dazed, and blood streaming from his head dripped into his eyes. He groped forward, and then he saw a strange and terrible thing. Gollum, on the edge of the abyss, was fighting like a mad thing with an unseen foe. To and fro he swayed, now so near the brink that he almost tumbled in, now dragging back, falling to the ground, rising and falling again. And all the while he hissed but spoke no words. The fires below awoke in anger. The red light blazed, and all the cavern was filled with a great glare and heat. Suddenly, Sam saw Gollum's long hands draw upwards to his mouth. His white fangs gleamed and then snapped as they bit. Frodo gave a cry, but there he was, fallen upon his knees at the chasm's edge. But Gollum, dancing like a mad thing, held aloft the ring, a finger still thrust within its circle. It shone now as if verily it was wrought of living fire. "Precious, precious, precious," Gollum cried. "My precious, oh my precious!" And with that, even as his eyes were lifted up to gloat on his prize, he stepped too far, toppled, wavered for a moment on the brink, and then, with a shriek, he fell. Out of the depths came his last wail, "Precious!" and he was gone. There was a roar and a great confusion of noise. Fires leaped up and licked the roof. The throbbing grew to a great tumult, and the mountain shook. Sam ran to Frodo and picked him up and carried him out to the door, and there upon the dark threshold of the Sammath Naur, high above the plains of Mordor, such wonder and terror came on him that he stood still, forgetting all else, and gazed as one turned to stone. A brief vision he had of swirling cloud, and in the midst of it towers and battlements tall as hills, founded upon a mighty mountain throne above immeasurable pits, great courts and dungeons, eyeless prisons sheer as cliffs, and gaping gates of steel and adamant, and then all passed. Towers fell and mountains slid, walls crumbled and melted, crashing down. Vast spires of smoke and spouting steams went billowing up until they toppled like an overwhelming wave, and its wild crest curled and came foaming down upon the land. And then at last, over the miles between, there came a rumble, rising to a deafening crash and roar. The earth shook, the plain heaved and cracked, and Orodruin reeled. Fire belched from its riven summit. The skies burst into thunder, seared with lightning. Down like lashing whips fell the torrent of black rain, and into the heart of the storm, with a cry that pierced all other sounds, tearing the clouds asunder, the Nazgul came, shooting like flaming bolts, as caught in the fiery ruin of hill and sky, they crackled, withered, and went out. "Well, this is the end, Sam Gamgee," said a voice by his side. And there was Frodo, pale and worn and yet himself again, and in his eyes there was peace now, neither strain of will, nor madness, nor any fear. His burden was taken away. There was the dear master of the sweet days in the Shire. "Master," cried Sam, and fell upon his knees. In all that ruin of the world, for the moment he felt only joy, great joy. The burden was gone. His master had been saved. He was himself again. He was free. And then Sam caught sight of the maimed and bleeding hand. "Your poor hand," he said, "and I have nothing to bind it with or comfort it. I would have spared him a whole hand of mine rather, but he's gone now, beyond recall, gone forever." "Yes," said Frodo, "but do you remember Gandalf's words? Even Gollum may have something yet to do? But for him, Sam, I could not have destroyed the ring. The quest would have been in vain, even at the bitter end. So let us forgive him, for the quest is achieved, and now all is over. I am glad you are here with me, here at the end of all things, Sam." So that, of course, is The Death of the Ring from The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. So thanks for tuning in to Some of Each Episode 10 Volcano tonight. We had Volcano by Garrett Hongo. We, of course, had The Return of the King by J.R.R. Tolkien. We had poems tonight by Naomi Shihab from Different Ways to Pray. We had Claribel Alegría, Flowers from the Volcano. We had a little of mine from Navigation, and I read you 2 poems by Derek Sheffield. So if you liked what you heard tonight, I hope that you'll get the books online or curbside from your local bookstores to support them during this time. And happy 40th anniversary of the eruption of Mount St. Helens. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week. Good night.